Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. Please help me back. Welcome back, the wonderful Joel Greene. Joel, if you haven't caught our previous podcast episode, you're missing out. So go check that out. But Joel is the author of The Immunity Code and the Way. He is a biohacker. He's creator of the immune-centric approach to health. He was one of the first guys to publish a study on gut health, and he's known as the very first gut health guy, believe it or not. Joel, welcome back. A little late, but we made it again.
Thanks. Yes, we did. My fault. Thanks, Shemaine. It's great to see you.
It's all right. I really enjoyed our last conversation. It was quite popular, pretty popular on YouTube. A lot of people really liked it. I don't need to give you any more glory. You know I'm a huge fan.
Yeah, let's just jump into it here.
In our last podcast conversation, we touched a little bit on inflammation, and I'm hoping we can go a bit deeper into that because I really believe inflammation is the arch nemesis of everybody. Like, inflammation is the root cause of all diseases. And as you discuss in your book, Aging, and I was hoping that's where we could go today to discuss aging and inflammation, because in your first book, you mentioned that inflammation is aging and vice versa.
Yeah. It's in a nutshell, it's just that with age, and you can read this in scientific studies where it says there are remarkable similarities between inflammation and aging, and it's because they're the same thing. So what happens with age is at a micro level, all of these different aspects of tissue are compromised in one way or another. And so the immune system is trying to fix that particular, N of one. And across the body, that N of one becomes trillions of issues it's trying to fix. So the immune system over time with age is just continually oversubscribed, trying to fix the problem. As if like just a localized injury, like you got a cut or something. Those same processes are just taking place across the entire body. So it's tough to define aging without defining inflammation and the immune system.
Yeah, for sure. Like, in the way I understand it is inflammation is aging. We discussed on the last conversation that if you can slow down or control the inflammation, you can technically slow down aging then on every level.
Yeah, it's about the rate of decline. So when you're in your 20s, you don't age very fast in your 20s because there isn't a lot of inflammatory milieu everywhere. But as you're compare a 20-year-old and a 60-year-old, the difference between the 20-year-old and the 60-year-old is the 60-year-old has what we would put under the umbrella of milieu, inflammatory milieu, but it's in everywhere and in everything. So in the fascia, the extracellular matrix, you have fibrotic collagens; those are inflammatory. In the muscle, you have fibrotic muscle tissue that's inflammatory. You have inflammatory proteins circulating in the blood, and so collectively, all of this fits under an umbrella. They actually have a word for, which is a phenotype called SASP, or secretory associated senescent phenotype. And the big revelation now is there's multiple variations on that. There's numerous types of SASP phenotype, but the net all of everything basically is just to say that um, with age, this inflammatory type sets in and it is a snowball on aging. So the 60-year-old is going to age way faster than the 20-year-old because when the 20-year-old goes to bed, his or her immune system doesn't have to do a lot of work. It doesn't have to try and fix all this stuff. Where the 60-year-old, that immune system is just like exhausted trying to fix all this stuff.
Hmm. So what we could say is, in layman's terms, an aspect of this inflammation and aging is partially due to just wear and tear over the years, just constantly grinding, as we were talking about earlier, but also the the insufficiency and I suppose the ineffectiveness of the immune system or immune cells to work as well as they used to.
That's certainly part of it. Yeah, you can encounter what's known as immune exhaustion, blunting of the immune system, all kinds of different aspects of the immune system, trying essentially to fix something that is just overwhelming its capabilities in terms of fixing the problem. And that's a good way to look at it. Yeah, I would say wear, tear, and repair eventually takes a toll on the body.
What do you think causes this? Do you think it's just people not taking care of themselves properly, especially as we get older, we're chasing career peaks. Kids become teenagers, they become a pain in the ass. And then you've got mortgages and everything. Is it just that and people forget to take care of themselves, or why do you think this kind of snowballs once you hit a certain age?
No, I think in my last book I kind of talked about this. There are four forces that are at work. The forces of time, it's accumulation, so you accumulate things, it's degradation, things wear out. And you can just kind of go down that list. Compensation, something overcompensates for something, accumulation, degradation, compensation. Um, and so that's kind of what you're dealing with. So example would be accumulation. A good example that I think I've spoken to before is you can accumulate inflammatory collagens in like the extracellular matrix. So
Hmm.
these are replacement collagens, and so the collagen you replace. It's kind of like you took your car into the shop and they didn't use the same part.
You can use the good part, yeah.
Yeah, they didn't use the good parts. They used the ones that, the non-EOM factory parts.
Hmm.
So the the non-EOM parts that you get stuck back in, they're in a sense you could say they're not as good, or rather they're inflammatory, and you start to accrue those across the body. So you can accumulate things. Another example of accumulation are senescent cells, and that's a big one. So senescent cells are basically cells that just stop dividing. They just stop dividing. And so what happens normally is a cell, it reaches a certain size, and then all of these programs kick in to tell it to divide, so you don't have these over-enlarged cells.
Hmm.
Well, that breaks. And so then you just get big cells, and then these big cells become inflammatory beacons. All they're doing is putting out inflammatory milieu. And the cherry on top is they go into what's called hypermetabolism, where they essentially start consuming tons and tons of glucose in order to just sustain themselves. And that's really a problem, particularly in the brain, because what it does is it sucks the available pool of gasoline or energy that otherwise would be available
Hmm.
to fuel the immune system to repair stuff.
Hmm.
So just the accumulation of senescent cells, you could explain a lot just by that, and it just keeps going.
Are these what we would refer to as zombie cells?
Pretty much, yeah. Pretty much, yeah.
So, two questions here. How would one approach getting rid of these zombie or senescent cells, like clearing them out? But the second question is this factory made collagen, this cheaper collagen, where is that coming from? Like, where is that getting produced?
Well, it depends on the tissue. In the example of adipose tissue, which uh, which is of particular importance because in the hierarchy of what affects everything else, adipose tissue tends to affect the rest of the body. Like it tends to, whatever happens there, as that goes, so goes the rest of the body.
Mhm.
So in adipose tissue, what happens is with age, either through weight gain or repeated weight loss, you have to repair the scaffolding system that's holding everything in place, the ECM. And this gets into some fascinating and really complex stuff that just to make it simple is suffice to say, um, imagine a smart building with an earthquake protection system of shock absorbers beneath the building. And if there's a whole bunch of tremors, then those shock absorbers transmit information to the central computer that runs the building. And then what happens is the building automatically reprograms in stiffer rebar into the walls of the building to help it because there's a bunch of tremors. Well, that's kind of how fat works. It's very,
Mhm.
by its very nature, mechanical forces can program the cell. It's called mechanotransduction. It's one of the fascinating things about human biology is that there's all these multiple messaging systems besides DNA.
Mhm.
That's one of them. So the cells themselves, the fat cells themselves, will be programmed through mechanical forces to produce these stiffer collagens that are meant to be protective, but because they're stiffer, they tend to be inflammatory.
And
And
that's
so,
because the more body fat you have, that in itself is inflammatory, so it's influencing more inflammatory collagen then.
It's not necessarily inflammatory. That's the interesting thing. So you can, and I'm not, believe me, I am not into the health at any size body positivity movement. Like you, no, that's stupid. You need to get lean. Okay. Let's be clear. You need to
Mm.
be lean. There's umpteen benefits from being lean. But what does need to be recognized is you can be overweight and have healthy fat. There are people who've I used an example in my first book, Butterbean, the boxer, had super healthy fat. Okay. So it's not necessarily being overweight, although it tends to go hand in hand.
Mm.
It's the body's reaction to having to reshape
All the
the
time, yeah.
yeah. And so
Like the yo-yo dieting we discussed the last time.
yeah, imagine taking your hand and just pushing it against a steel mesh cage, and the harder you push it against the cage, the more your hand becomes inflamed.
Mm.
And so that's kind of the idea.
I would argue that Butterbean was also the exception. He was an anomaly, maybe.
Totally. 100%. Yeah, 100%. Yeah, that's why I said normally what you see is they go hand in hand. So when you see obesity and you see people who are overweight, you tend to be inflamed with that. So there's that rare anomaly that tells us it's not necessarily the fat,
Mhm.
but the health of your fat does tend to more or less coincide with weight.
Mhm. And just the zombie cells, how would we get rid of those or
Man,
flush out them?
yeah, that is probably one of the best questions in the modern era of health. And my approach is that you need to twice a year, as you get over, let's say, 50, you need to flush them twice a year purposely. You need to have 2 weeks a year where you're cleaning out senescent cells. And the basic strategy to that is that you want to be on a diet that's highly anti-inflammatory. You could do a keto diet. You can do a version of the Whey, my diet. Um, but the foundation is you want a diet that's highly anti-inflammatory. And then you want to add in senolytics with that. So the easy one that I talked about in my first book is fisetin. That's a senolytic, but there's a lot more and a lot more powerful ones out there. So it's basically like kind of a bronze, silver, gold medal proposition. So the bronze is just use fisetin, and then you could stack in ketones with that. So like exogenous ketones plus fisetin is going to work pretty well. But then if you want to really ratchet it up a layer, there's other things you can look at. So the first level, the silver, would be surprisingly looking at antibiotics. So looking at erythromycin
Hmm.
um, combined with doxycycline. So those
Hmm.
two, and then combine that with senolytics. And then the gold medal above that would be very specific drugs. So you could look at what are called SGLT2 inhibitors as kind of like really, really effective way to do that. And there's a whole movement now repurposing those types of drugs for longevity.
Hmm.
And then at the pinnacle, the top of the mountain, the king would be, which really is just, I don't even know that I should mention it because it's very, very difficult to get, if at all, but it would be NKT cells, natural killer T cells.
Hmm.
I'm going to do a round of those actually next month. And those just completely wipe out clear senolytic cells.
Unless you can support them yourself through, say, some reishi or shaga mushroom or something like that. But there's a whole big caveat there as well. So I agree with you in what you say about the antibiotics because although they're demonized in context with a really good plan, they can be very beneficial. A lot of people destroy themselves with antibiotics because they take antibiotics, but they continue to eat Wendy's and all this crap at the same time. But if you had a good plan where you knew you were using antibiotics with a purpose to kill off gram-negative bacteria or something, and you also had this really powerful dietary plan as well, then it has a purpose. It can be a valuable tool, as we'd call it. But the problem with the ketogenic diet that I see in the context of the people I work with, which would be primarily very highly stressed, highly driven, busy career women, moms, mid 40s, is that something like that's just going to exacerbate their stress response even more, especially if they're now in perimenopause too. So my idea of an anti-inflammatory diet is going to include a lot of polyphenol foods and the phenol powder you speak about, and more that approach than going full keto because they already have adrenal issues. I need to make sure they're still getting some sugar in there. But the whole just to make it clear for people, like an anti-inflammatory approach can look multiple ways. It doesn't just mean you have to go carnivore or keto all the time. So one other thing,
Yeah, that's a really good point.
it is. One other thing that you mentioned, we kind of touched on the last time, but I feel it's relevant to circle back to it now, is the concept of old blood, which I understand to be inflammatory, sticky, gluggy blood. Can you touch on that a bit? Because that is a huge problem, especially in the clientele I just mentioned. You've got these highly stressed women, they're still cycling, they're in perimenopause, loads of inflammation, and then I see that in their cycle, which ding ding, old blood. So, yeah.
Yeah, for many years, the super elite have had access to what's known as parabiosis, which is young blood transfusions, and heaven knows where they get it, but
Well,
that's a whole
maybe
other
we've an
topic.
idea. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. Anyway, that's a whole rabbit hole we won't go down. But suffice to say that what is there's good research on parabiosis, and it's readily evident when you look at the research on it that there are clear differences between the blood of the young and the old, starting with inflammatory proteins that are just circulating around in the blood, and these are proteins that are essentially a response to what's going on in the environment. And so I think the analogy I've used before is the blood becomes like a river that's on fire. And so everywhere it goes, it's setting everything else on fire. So you kind of have problems when the blood be itself becomes an inflammatory medium. You know,
Hmm.
that's another part of the snowball of age. There's a lot of things that contribute to it, though. It's not just proteins. It's also the loss of the integrity of the lining of the vasculature of the endothelium. It's the overexpression of certain kinds of antioxidants like hydrogen peroxide, and just kind of all these things working together as we get old. So where the blood itself becomes inflammatory, and it's a problem.
Yeah, because the blood is going through your whole system every hour. So everything it touches gets a touch of this inflammation. And you see it, people get really tense. Their neck, their muscles, and their back tighten up. Some people can get sore to touch. Like their skin hurts. They're that inflamed. I don't know if you follow Dr. Mercola. He released a newsletter either yesterday or the day before, and this newsletter was about the instances of kidney disease are on the rise now. And I would wonder if this is a factor in that because obviously the kidneys filter every drop of blood every hour, and we have this fire running through the kidneys. Of course, it's going to cause some damage there.
Hmm. Yeah, it's an interesting question. Yeah, I mean, I don't think I'd. There's a lot to that. We could chew up a lot of real estate on that one. So,
Mm. Do you know as well? Do you know Morley Robbins?
mhm.
Morley Robbins, the iron copper guy.
Yeah.
Um, and he discusses this inflammatory blood a lot,
Mm.
especially in the context of the menstrual cycle and trying to help women, obviously, because men can't have periods, just in case you didn't know that, Joel. Um,
What?
I know, shocking.
How's
But
that possible?
women he tries to get across the point that, well, one, if you're having a heavy bleed and there's a lot of blood clots, that comes back to that inflamed blood, but also that as much as it's uncomfortable, this is your body's mechanism of trying to help you survive by getting all of this blood out of you, almost a form of phlebotomy in itself that you're flushing so then the stem cells can generate cleaner new blood. But that's a whole other conversation as well. But really interesting when you start to, not as much as we do nowadays, focus on all the different systems. We kind of overlook the blood, but we've more blood than we have systems when you think of it like that, and nobody really talks about the blood.
Uh, yeah. I mean, the blood is an inflammatory medium. I mean, there are people who touch on it tangentially, like the issue of iron overload with age. It's a big topic. The thing that gets left out of a lot is the profile with immune cells with age. So a monocyte is a macrophage that is in the blood. So primarily in the circulation, macrophages can mature out of the bone marrow, and then when they go into the blood, we change the name and we call them monocytes, or depending on what happens, we call them foam cells. We have different words, but they're essentially macrophages. And one of the things that happens with age is that we tend to accrue iron. And so this never used to be a problem when people weren't living very long, but now because everybody's living longer, you just accrue more iron.
Hmm.
And so what happens with age is that when iron disposal sort of becomes an issue, the immune cells, the monocytes can sort of take up the load for that, and they can begin to sequester excess iron in them. But then the process of doing that, they lose the ability to do really well what they're supposed to do. And so, all that to say, the issue of the blood is complex. There's a lot of variables in there, but there are things that we can do. Like iron overload is a really good example. My approach with that is that we can, now that human lactoferrin is available, you can sort of use that as a baseline for iron overload, and then there's a lot of things you can add on to that.
Is there much copper in the lactoferrin?
Um, well, it can bind copper, but copper is not. There's this school of thought that copper is the central issue. I think there's an entire sort of like tribe centered around that. But when you examine it and you really go into that rabbit hole, it doesn't really hold up. So they have different mediators. So iron is mediated principally by proteins, where copper is more enzymatic in its nature. And when you kind of look at the two, the issue of copper being the central driving factor with iron overload doesn't really hold up to scrutiny. It's more an issue that as we get older and you start to accumulate iron, there's a number of factors that play into that. One is the microbiome. Do you have bacteria with iron binding cytophores? And then the issue of lactoferrin and all these things can kind of lead into a way to deal with the issue that is, I think, kind of a little more targeted.
Yeah, and there's the thyroid issue as we age as well. But I wanted to discuss then, as we continue to go through this whole aging thing, how this influences telomeres. Because for a while there, if you remember, maybe 10 years ago, telomeres were a hot topic. There was a lot of books out about
Right.
telomeres, and then it
Yeah.
all went quiet again.
Yeah.
And how we were told telomeres, remember, they would tell us that a simple way to think of telomeres is the end caps on your shoelace. So, yeah, and then it just went quiet. But you kind of have a different opinion around telomeres, and you are more sore leaning towards glycans being a better predictor of aging.
Well, there are let's just say that starting with kind of high level, there are in this era now there are different ways of testing how well you're aging, okay? And at the high level, none of them are that great.
Mm.
Okay. There's this illusion that you can take these tests and they tell you your biological age. None of them are that great. Let's just kind of start with that. But the typical way of looking at it, kind of looking at telomere age, that's certainly an indicator. Another is looking at these sugar proteins. So, in my first book, I had an entire chapter on what's called glycosylation, and I don't know how deep you want to go into this, but I took it out because it's way too much. It's way too complex, and it was already too complex to begin with. But suffice to say that the body has multiple information encoding systems besides DNA.
Mhm.
And one of the most fascinating is what's called post-translational modifications, or PTMs. And essentially, the body can encode a whole information system in these sugar chains that are attached to proteins. Um, and so, one of the ways that you can measure aging is with age, what happens is um, there's a particular antibody, IgG, that has I'm just trying to think how deep to go down this rabbit hole here.
Go
There's
deep
a,
if you like. People who don't want to listen will turn off.
all right. So it gets into what's known as the concept of what's called a residue. A residue is an amino acid. Okay, so what we call proteins are really nanomachines. They're nanobots. Okay, and these nanomachines can have a distinct portion on them that's an amino acid, and they very often act as binding sites.
Mhm.
So there's a residue for galactosamine um, on these glycoproteins that are formed with IgG. It's called IgG0. And with age, what we see is the ratio of galactosamine changes. And so there's a test for that. You can actually measure. And it's a probably maybe a different way of looking at how well you're aging based on the accumulation of these particular glycans in the blood. Um, Maybe in some ways more accurate. The problem I have with almost all of these tests is they don't actually measure things that are obvious. Like the simplest example is just go sprint right now with no warm up. Let's see you do that because any kid can do that. Any teenager can do that. Most early 20 somethings can do that. And that's like the single best, like anybody that can do that is young. Okay. Anybody that can't do that is old, and it's that simple. They don't measure the aging of the organs very well. There's a whole bunch of ways of measuring aging. So, I mean, I'll just without getting too complex, I'll just say that we have some cool tests now, some ways of measuring aging, telomeres, glycans, all this stuff. They're indicative, but I wouldn't put too much stock into any of them. And they can, many of the tests you see nowadays, like you see a lot of influencers doing aging tests, you can fake those so easily. You can gimmick those tests. I could literally within 3 days test out to be 25, and then 3 days later test out to be 80,
Mhm.
just based on a bunch of things, a bunch of ways of doing different things prior to the tests. So, yeah,
Including
sorry.
inflammation.
Yeah.
In-
Yeah, I could go get really inflamed. I could, if I wanted to look 85, I could just, come right out of the heat sauna
Mhm.
and just eat a bunch of fried food and I would test out to be 85.
Yeah, not rehydrate and stay up all night. So,
Which, by the way, is the worst thing. Like as you get over a certain age, like I've noticed, not to waffle here, but I'm getting to bed earlier and earlier the older I get. So
oh my God, I go to bed at 8:30 and
yeah,
I'm like asleep by 9. Like if I want to perform, I have to. But then this week I was like, man, I need to start getting to bed earlier. So I've started going a few minutes earlier and I'm like, I have no shame, but at the same time, it's a little pathetic, but however.
this is an ongoing convo like with my wife. We're like, hey, you remember when we were like early 20s and we would go out at 10:30?
Hmm.
Now it's like, maybe 7:30 is the new target.
Yeah, even that's what I was saying to my son a few days ago is no matter how healthy you are and how well you take care of yourself, there is still what we were saying before we even started recording. There's still the element of like wear and tear and grinding, and it just exhausts you on some I don't know, maybe it's a metaphysical level where you're just like, I'm just going to bed. Like, I can't deal with this. So it's bizarre. To me, it is bizarre. I can perform well, I can think well. I think I look good for my age in the sense of healthy. And then still, as soon as 7:30 comes, I'm like, right, time to wind down now. I'm done. And maybe it is a matter of conditioning that I've just got into the habit of doing it. Once a couple of times a year, I'll stay up late and I might go to a concert or a rave or something because that's my thing. Man, I pay for it for like a week.
Oh gosh, raves are your thing?
Yeah, but that's not like I don't pay for it with a hangover. I pay for it with the exhaustion, that slight disruption in my circadian rhythm. Whew, that just does me in.
That's what I think that's an interesting thing. I think that's what most people notice, like a very conspicuous aspect of aging is what is the cost of like an all-night bender? Like when you were young, like when you were 20 something, you'd sleep till noon the next day, you're fine, you're back at it. Now it's 6 months. Now it's like you don't feel right for 6 months.
There, I laugh and think like again, I grew up in Dublin, and upon reflection, I don't know how I'm still alive. The mad stuff we did, we would just do not all-nighters all weekend and then still drive to work the next day after getting home an hour earlier. And I'm like, I remember falling asleep behind the steering wheel and I'm still here. So God obviously had a plan. Upon reflection now, that sounds like hell to me as much as it was fun, but I
See,
wanted to say to you, what you were saying there about the sprinting, there's obviously a big push now on weightlifting and resistance for like there always has been, but targeting women, midlife women, perimenopause, a lot of talk about that now. And I love weightlifting, very important. But what I've noticed is there's a movement now away from cardio, as if cardio is not important. And it's all like focused, lift heavy, which can be problematic if you're already very inflamed. So now I have women telling me, oh, yeah, I lift weights a lot. But man, if I walk up a stairs, I get out of breath. That's a bit of a problem. Do you see that?
yeah, it's so trends tend to, or rather, mass adoption tends to follow about 30 years behind whatever you should be doing. Okay, and so what we're seeing right now is the final adoption phase of 1970s bodybuilding. Which me personally, I've just moved way beyond that now, and it's there in the picture, but it's not the emphasis anymore. Because the things that you'll find really keep you like when you get to my age, what matters a lot is your energy levels. Like that really matters. Like you really want to feel energetic all the time. And then I would just call it your youthfulness in terms of how you get around. Like just the way you got around when you were, youthful in your 20s was you kind of just did everything bounding upstairs and just, herky jerky kind of quick and all that. That becomes really important later because what you notice with everybody your age is they're all waddling. Everybody's
Mm.
waddling. Okay.
Yeah.
And you start to see it get worse and worse and worse until it's like you're in a population of penguins. Everybody's waddling back and forth.
A
And
population of pregnant women.
yeah. So anyways, with respect to, kind of the mass adoption of the 1970s style bodybuilding stuff, I do think it's more important for women than men because s- the way that a woman's body changes, strength training can be a really huge asset to help retard that kind of stuff, to help slow all that down. Um, but part of the problem, though, is the de-emphasis on sort of cardiovascular endurance and then athletic ability. Those two things need to be a little bit more in the picture, is what I would offer, because what you see a lot of, that I see a lot of, is people who do the weight training thing. They get in their 50s, they get in their 60s, they get older, but they have all kinds of mobility problems and they really don't have really good endurance, really good VO2 max. And it's the endurance, it's the VO2 max that in some ways helps keep you young because the heart and the body as a whole just has to work a lot less harder to create the sugar that powers everything else, create the ATP that powers everything else. So I would just say right now that we're in this overemphasis on 70s style stuff. And a really good idea is to kind of maybe be open to what's the latest. And if you look at what the latest is, it's a lot of athletic based training that involves things that all in one way or another center around the ability to kind of move in the way you did when you were 20. And that's, in fact, I just did this pretty big workout 2 days ago that was entirely that. And what I noticed from it is I just feel incredible. Like as I'm going through my week, I feel incredible.
Mm.
Like, and that's the feeling you want.
I wonder if there's more of a benefit of moving through your body as part of your resistance training program than there is with just lifting heavy weights, as important as they are. I've noticed a pop up now more of military style body workouts and calisthenics and stuff like that. And I do wonder because that is forcing your body to move in certain ways where when we lift weights, it can be very linear and not as natural as we would move in our daily life.
I'll tell you where I got with that. So I was in my early 40s. and I could bench press a lot of weight. I was really good in a straight line and certain movements. And I got to where if I moved 1 degree off that,
Mhm.
like I was terrible, terrible. What really woke me up was I went and did a yoga class when I was like 42, and I was huge. I was much bigger than I am now with tons of muscle. And I got out of that yoga class like shit, just drenched in sweat and and it just really woke me up to like, what am I doing here? Like I look a certain way, but that has nothing to do with anything.
Mhm.
And so that kind of really recorrected me down the road of being highly, highly functional as I aged, and I've never gone back. Because what I noticed, I think what a lot of people notice who adopt 70 style bodybuilding is that as you get into your third decade with that stuff, your fourth decade, the injuries start adding up to the point where you begin limiting what the body can do, and it's because of accrual of injuries.
Mhm.
And then just talk to anybody who's done it like 30, 40 years and like, well, I don't really do that anymore because my shoulder's bad, or I don't really squat anymore because my lower back. And you start hearing stuff like that all the time. So, yeah, I mean, it's a big topic, but I think you're on point, kind of noticing, the movement back towards body weight because it's different. It's 100% different. Like the way the way you use muscles doing body weight or doing athletic training, it's 100% different.
Mhm. It's interesting what you said about the bench because I've been highly focused on my bench press for a couple of months now, barbell bench, and um, I can bench 140 pounds, so
What? No
not
way.
bad. Yeah, I can. But
Wow. Are you serious?
yeah,
I
so
think
but I've
that's
been training for like almost 20 years as well, just like you. I'm an old timer.
I think that's you might be pretty close to like I think if you competed, you might be pretty close to like a record with I haven't
I
looked
don't think
recently.
I'm record, but it's heavy enough for someone my size. But the point is, yesterday I decided to do a different type of workout, and I decided, okay, I'm going to just go back to dumbbells for a bit, and just so I can get that full range of motion in. You know what happened? The dumbbells wobbled because I had lost stability of the ligaments in my shoulder because I haven't been using them because all I'm doing is going up, down. So I wasn't challenging my joints. And I went, man. And it's a nice wake up call because you forget, like you with the yoga, but it's crazy. Just because you can lift heavy doesn't mean a lot in what you're saying. It doesn't mean my joints are functioning the way they should be. It doesn't mean I have the stability that I should have or like the ligament strength or tendons. So that was like, wow, I think I need to go back to dumbbells now for a while too.
Yeah, this is sort of a very interesting topic. It gets to the ethos of bodybuilding versus a different ethos. And I think I mean, I don't know. Anyways, when you look at the ethos of bodybuilding, the central ethos is sort of how you look. It's the appearance. It's sort of the appearance first ethos. And then along with that, there is this almost bordering on a religious sort of fervor around it, which is the set of mantras like lift heavy, bro, just eat more protein, bro. And there's all these mantras that
There's an
surround it.
ego there. Yeah.
So it becomes like very much like a tribal kind of thing.
Mm.
And I've always oriented towards like whatever I'm doing is like, does this make sense? Was what I'm doing make sense to do? Because if it doesn't make sense, maybe I should change it up.
Mhm.
And part of that ethos, I think, is counterproductive over time because if you just examine it analytically, just like you were saying, you were just a few months of doing barbells and then it's like I'm getting a little weaker in this area, so I need to kind of change it up and do stuff. But you can go down that road of like lift heavy, bro, and do all this kind of stuff, and you might look really good for maybe a decade or two, but then as you get older, there's all kinds of problems, all kinds of issues from having trained that way, from exactly what you said, that there
Mhm.
are just muscle imbalances, there are stability issues, all kinds of things that are not youth. Youth is something entirely different. Youth is stopping power. Youth is like, you're playing basketball, the ball's about to go to bounds, and you can stop on a dime and pivot. That's youth,
Mhm.
and keeping that really needs to be a little more or a lot more central, I think, in the convo.
Mhm. Well, Joel, we kind of went off on a tangent there. We are
We
both
waffled.
waffling. Yeah. I'm going to hear you say that in all your Instagram videos now. So, just back to, though, the inflammation, because it's supposed to be what
Yeah.
we're talking about.
Sorry.
It's my fault. Um, so, can we discuss the body fat gut lining access? Because I have an opinion, as much as many specialists out there discuss the importance of gut health. Like your gut must be, there's a lot of argument that your gut should be the first thing you address if you're trying to get healthy. I don't fully agree with that, but I do agree that a lot of inflammation starts in the gut and then goes systemic or spirals from there. But what is this body fat gut lining access that you speak of?
Well, it's that if the gut lining is porous, is profuse, then you're going to get endotoxins, which are cell wall fragments leaking into the blood, and you're also going to get macrophages that can translocate, or that's the big science word for move, that can move from your. I got a bunny trail here for a second. I heard two well-known dudes the other day talking about what amounted to just eat less, and they were just like trying to science just eat less with like, well, when you consider all of the, like pivot points and variables associated with adiposity, could there be stronger lever? And it's just like, dude, shut up. It's like you're talking about overeating, right? Anyways, back to the topic. Yeah, so you can get endotoxin leaking in the serum. It can lodge in body fat, and then it disrupts insulin function in body fat, and then your body fat gets inflamed. And when your body fat gets inflamed, you basically can't lose weight and all kinds of issues.
And your brain gets inflamed, and then you have loads of mental health issues as well. So another term for endotoxins is more commonly known as LPS, so
Lipopolysaccharide.
lipopolysaccharides, which
Yeah.
only people like me and you really use endotoxins. Otherwise, LPS for other people, and then for the lay person, it's like I tell my people, think of it like bad bacteria poop that goes into your bloodstream. Just that's like a really simple way to put it. And you obviously don't want that. But you mentioned there, this is a direct influence on body weight, insulin resistance. So, like, I really want to drive this home because I don't think people get this. There's a huge connection between lipopolysaccharides, these inflammatory molecules, and weight gain. How does that happen or work?
So kind of what I just described, if your microbiome is like what you get from what's called the sad American diet or just what I hate this term, ultra processed food. It used to be just called processed food. I don't know why we needed to add more stuff to it. But just from a poor diet, or even sustained keto diets or carnivore diets, you're gonna get a microbiome profile that is dysbiotic, and then you're gonna get a lot of endotoxin and LPS leakage into the serum, and then it can translocate to body fat. So the problem there becomes that your fat doesn't work well, and the job of your fat is to store fat, but also act as an immune secretory regulatory organ over the rest of the body. So when it doesn't work well, insulin doesn't work well. And when insulin doesn't work well, you're going to gain weight, period. End of story. And that's really it.
Mhm. And when
So,
insulin doesn't work well, then leptin doesn't work well. So now you have issues feeling satiated and you're more hungry. But this is like way deeper than people think. Like I mentioned, when you've got an abundance of these LPS in your bloodstream, you've got mental health issues. If you've got mental health struggles, you're going to have a really hard time making good lifestyle and food choices. Like that's on a very basic level because you're already looking for a dopamine hit or you're self-medicating with the ultra processed foods or alcohol or whatever it may be. So like this is why I think I agree the gut needs a lot of attention and the inflammation starts in the gut, but it goes, it spreads more than people recognize. Because all we hear is, I've got bloating, I've got gut issues, I got to fix my gut, I've got. No, you also have to look at everything else that's happening in your body because whatever's happening in your gut, it's spreading like wildfire.
Well, that's the key point is that there definitely does appear to be a sequence. So it does appear to be mostly correct that these issues start in the gut, they spread to body fat, and then they spread elsewhere. And I think that's the key takeaway is that because there is a sequence to address it. And yeah, you're right. Uh, when body fat becomes dysregulated, then you see issues everywhere. You're going to see issues with muscle, issues in the brain, and part of a big concomitant with that is so there were some studies done back in 2007 that showed it's the energy density of modern food that it takes sugar and fat in combination in ratios that are so far out of what nature can provide that it
Mm.
breaks all of the hormonal controls over eating. So, in other words, it creates compulsive eating and disinhibition. And then at the same time with that, now today, which is much more prevalent, you just sort of have this dopamine addiction from scrolling. And so you have all these sort of like attractors, these great attractors of impulsiveness that, just fuel the fire, so to speak.
Hmm. That carb fat combination is a bigger problem than people recognize. I discussed this a lot. This is where the conversation around the Randall cycle comes in. But there's a lot of practitioners, so-called nutritionists, dietitians that have never even heard of this stuff. How are you creating meal plans for people if you don't know this stuff? That just makes no sense. Anyway, I'm still not waffling, ranting. So, a few things that we can do. I use a lot of what you teach in my working, so thank you for that. I apple skins, I'm a huge fan, love apples, phenol powder, just I use a lot of your things. But one thing I really like for helping with gut health is the daisy cutter. And
No.
I tell people about the daisy cutter kind of in a way that you describe it, if I'm correct, please correct me if I'm wrong, is that the daisy cutter was a type of bomb that they used in Vietnam that once dropped, it just took care of everything. That's what it did. It just wiped everything out. So
Yeah.
that's the idea behind our daisy cutter meals. It'll just take care of everything.
Yeah, it was so the reason they named it Daisy Cutter is that as it propagated, it just cut the treetops off, like just went through, cut the treetops off. But yeah, the Daisy Cutter, sometimes to get extreme results, you need extreme protocols. And so the Daisy Cutter is this protocol that is in my first book. And basically, long story short, you take fat to zero, you take certain types of fiber super high, and then you take protein very high. So part of the trick is you're just cutting fat to zero. That's part of the trick. But then the other part of the trick is that you're giving so much substrate for the right type of bacteria that the metabolites, those bacteria are making drive fat loss in and of themselves. And so that's a whole thing called fasting induced adipose factor. And it's pretty amazing. Like generally speaking, people try it. That what they notice is their poop no longer smells at all, and then
It
you
takes
can see
care of it.
yeah, yeah, and you can see some mind-boggling fast fat loss with it. So that's pretty cool.
I actually don't think it's that hard, and I've been doing it a while since learning it from you that I've been able to manipulate it for my clients. Like,
Mm,
I'll do like a large amount of boiled green beans
hmm
because digestion, a bit of sea salt. I'll do a really lean steak and some like spicy mustard or something. So I'm still getting the spices and the polyphenol. So there's not, there's maybe 3 grams of fat there in the whole meal, if not less. And it's not actually that bad once you kind of get into it. And we spoke about green beans before. I really like green beans. So it doesn't have to be just a plate of spinach and chicken breast. It doesn't have to be that difficult. You just have to get a bit creative with it.
Yeah, one thing I'll add to that I've noticed over the years, after doing it so long, is that it's very interesting. The reward center in the brain, the food's reward center, has gone to it's really changed over time. So after having done it so much over the years, it's much harder now for me to do green beans. Um, just kind of an anecdote that's very interesting that just tells us like the impact of time and that the body is homeostatic in its nature and it's a set of variables chasing equilibrium. So just an interesting thing.
That'll be interesting to see if my tolerance changes over the years because I'll have green beans maybe 4 times a week, five. Like I'm I'm so busy, I'm like, just get it in and move on. So I don't kind of over obsess too much about the food. But you touched a little bit there on fasting.
Hmm.
Let's talk about that. What do you think about fasting now? Because there's a lot of the big names now that have done a 360 on fasting, and they're starting to realize for some people this may actually cause a bigger problem. So where do you think we are now with that?
Well, that's because so one of the biggest problems that just in general is in the space that we're in is you have people who are well credentialed but don't have a long history of doing stuff. And so they do stuff and then immediately publish on it, start writing, start trying to teach other people. And they are not experienced enough in the long-term patterns of things to understand what they're really doing. And so you're on their learning curve, which is way behind the eight ball. And so, yeah, that's pretty much what you would expect if you'd had about 10 years in, that you're going to learn that fasting has a lot of benefits, but it has a lot of downsides, and that, the a much more advanced way of looking at it is that to leverage the benefits, it requires a whole bunch of think through. And then you can use fasting strategically without the downside, but just this sort of like which you heard a lot of going back 5 years ago from a lot of very prominent people. Fasting is the way. Intermittent fasting is the way. And now you see millions of people who are just completely have jacked up their hunger hormones, jacked up their cortisol, all kinds of things from someone else's learning curve. And
Mm.
that's a learning curve going forward. Is like if someone hasn't done something for at least 10 years, you probably shouldn't listen to it.
There's a lot of damage to the thyroid has been done for a lot of people. Well, more specifically, women. Men have a bit more flexibility with fasting, you lucky ducks, compared to us. So, but this one thing I took away from you is the apples again, and I created, I don't know if I created it, maybe I heard it somewhere, but what I would do with some of my clients is a form of a mono fast or a mono diet, and they will just have 3 or 4 apples across a 24-hour. That way, I'm still kind of getting them into that kind of Walter Longo fasting mimicking space, but I'm keeping their digestion active because if they're already stressed and I put them on like just a liquid fast, the next day I've noticed they'll all get gut issues and diarrhea and gut spasms because it dropped their hydrochloric acid too low and enzymes. And I found that by giving them 3 to 4 apples over this kind of 24, 36 hours was enough to keep the digestion active, but give them the benefits. Yay for apples.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, that's well, that gets into a bunch of other stuff. One comment I did want to make though that I think is if you're listening to this, if there's one takeaway you took from all of our time together here in this, it's that you've been sold an idea that's wrong, and it's the idea that it's never actually expressed succinctly. It's more subconscious, but I just want to outline it, which is that the body is static, meaning that whenever you hear these simplistic things like, keto's the way, or fasting's the way, you hear those types of simplistic things, you know it's wrong.
Mhm.
And the reason is that what the body really is, and this is the crux of everything, if you can get this, the body is a set of variables, and those variables are continually chasing what's called equilibrium, dynamic equilibrium, which is the idea of a seesaw. Okay.
Like balance. We're looking for balance. Yeah.
Right. Simple way of saying it, dynamic equilibrium. So as you start to apply something that you think is beneficial, you're loading up this end of things, and now time comes into play. Okay. And it's like, oh, it's great. It's so great. It's working. It's working. Okay. But over time, that equilibrium gets out of whack. And then the body is going to make all kinds of adjustments to try and bring things back in equilibrium. And very often, what happens is by pulling the body out of equilibrium, by doing something you think is healthy, but somebody told you to do it who hadn't done it for 10 years, 20 years, what happens is now you're creating problems that are very hard to fix. And so
Hmm.
that idea that this is a dynamic equilibrium, a bunch of variables chasing that equilibrium, that is the most important idea anybody could ever take away, because it'll keep you from jumping on to simplistic solutions that someone with great credentials with no 10, 20-year background of doing it to know if it's going to work. And you see that there was a huge patch of well-credentialed people that jumped into this space about 2014. And almost all of them are in the rebound phase of whatever they were talking about. Either they've regained a bunch of weight or the thing that they said was the answer wasn't the answer and they had to rebrand what they were doing as something else. You see that across the board. And a lot of people are dealing with a lot of damage as a result of that. So you really have to be careful.
So, well, that kind of brings me to your story that you shared last night on Instagram. And I was like, we got to talk about this tomorrow. And that whole notion of balance in the body no matter what you do, your body's going to try achieve homeostasis, especially if you're pushing the pedal too fast. So, just a few minutes. I don't want to keep you too much longer. The Before we get into the post, GLPs, what do you think on the GLP use now and how it's kind of blown out of proportion?
Mm. I mean, oh gosh, this is like an hour podcast. So high level, let's start with the modern fishbowl or the modern ecosystem that we live in. For lack of a better word, let's just say it's highly contaminated. And we could point out 30 different things that are contributing to that. Everybody's got their list, of what the main villains are. But suffice to say, it's highly contaminated. And so the net of that is that losing weight has a lot of barriers to it. Now, it's not as simple as just cut your calories, as much as a lot of people would like you to believe that, because there's all these other things at work. And so when you run across, sometimes you'll run across people that no matter what they do, they can't lose weight, and then they find GLP-1s, and GLP-1s are the only thing that works for them. So we have to weigh off the benefit of that versus the potential long-term downside of that. And the downside is different depending on the drugs that we're talking about. But the first thing I think to understand is that there's always a downside to something. So, so there's
Except
that.
chocolate. Let's just make this clear. There's no downside to chocolate. It's just,
I'd probably go with you on that, actually.
yeah. Okay.
The other thing, the other thing is to say there's unknowns, and it's always good to say there's unknowns. You can never speak with like incredible, like you see people on social media talking with certainty, and the more you see certainty, the more likely it's a grift. And like at the extreme level, you see people with extreme certainty talking about things like complete conviction, confidence, complete confidence. Well, the word for that used to be widely known is a confidence scheme, meaning all you gotta do is seem super confident. The more certainty, the more likely there's a problem. So we shouldn't be speaking with absolute certainty on GLP-1s. I mean, there's unknowns 10, 15, 20 years down the line. And so I would just say that it requires careful consideration. Maybe some people, maybe that's the only solution. But it just requires a lot of think through in terms of like what could potentially be the problems that we might face down the line. And I think there's potentially down the line unknown things nobody's talked about, nobody's yet discovered that could come.
Hmm.
So it's a balance. Like if you're overweight and nothing's going to work, you've got to get your weight down. When you look at the statistics for being overweight, I mean, there's no good reason to stay overweight. Like everything's better if you can get your weight down. So there's that. And so I wish there was this simplistic answer I could give, like they're good, they're bad, but it's complex because there are so many barriers in the environment now to dropping body fat that sometimes you need a really big crowbar, and they can definitely be helpful, but there's also a lot of things to think about. So.
But even in saying that, what you said about the calories in, calories out, the fact that the GLPs don't actually work for everyone and make no difference for some people tells us that there's more to it than the calories in, calories out, eat less concept. So there's a lot. I believe there's a lot of issues with the GLPs. My biggest concern is a lot of what we just spoke about, the gut issues and the thyroid issue. I personally think you can't mess around with something like this and not expect some sort of thyroid issue. As much as there's well-meaning practitioners and promoters out there of it saying, well, prioritize your protein and make sure you're lifting weights. That's great, but let's be real. How many people are doing that? Nobody's doing it. Like, we're the minority who actually do this stuff. So,
Well, first of all, when I hear that, prioritize your protein and make sure you're lifting weights. My answer to that is, oh, 70s bodybuilding. Oh, that's the answer. 70s bodybuild. Oh, why didn't you just say that? My gosh, why isn't everybody doing 70s? Wait, it didn't work for the people in the 70s. Like, what are you talking about? Okay, 70s bodybuilding is not the answer. It's not. I hate to break it to whoever thinks that's the answer. It's not the answer. And also to your point, there are so many there are so many environmental barriers to like at the highest level, insulin function is disrupted across all species right now. And I have my own pet theories as to why that's true. But when insulin doesn't work, um, the calorie thing's not going to work. It's not if insulin doesn't work. So there's very tall barriers. And then it gets into like what particular drug are we talking about? I do know people on Retta, and they can't eat on Retta. They have no appetite, none whatsoever. So
And they
I mean,
don't think
it's
that's not going to cause some damage.
could be an issue for sure. Yeah.
So last night, your Instagram story was about you believe the SGLT2 inhibitors are potentially the next big weight loss drug. Most people have not never heard of these inhibitors unless they've had some dealings with kidney issues. So what is this? Why do you think we're going to lean this way next? Do you think, I would guess, is because we just keep going for more extreme, more extreme, more extreme?
Nah, I think it's well, I mean, I hate to say this, but and I'm not aligned with this, but I just think it's an inevitability that the future is drugs. I mean, that's just that's the unfortunate reality looming in front of us because the drugs are getting more and more effective, and the drugs that are in the pipeline are even crazier, in terms of like the scope of what they do. So this new thing we're going to see is the repurposing of these diabetic drugs, SGLT2 inhibitors for longevity. And what they do is essentially they block glucose reuptake in the kidneys, so you pee out glucose. That's what they do, and so they lower glucose, and that's a good thing. Glucose is highly inflammatory. That's the problem. Glucose in the serum. That's why getting your blood sugar below 100 matters so much because as your blood sugar stays elevated, then you're potentiating senolytic cells, you're potentiating everything bad, nothing good. So a lot of people don't know this, but insulin is highly anti-inflammatory. So
Mm-hmm.
insulin is like, a miracle from that sense because it lowers inflammation.
It's the same with cortisol, though. Just because we are told it's bad doesn't mean it's all bad. There are pros and cons.
Cortisol is essential. I mean, that's the funny thing about it. Cortisol is essential. When you start to deal with people enough and you run across people that have low cortisol issues and then they get on cortisol, it's
A
incredible the
lot of
transformation it makes.
inflammation, yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing. So, yeah.
So, last question, Joel. Someone asked me this on a podcast recently, actually. It was Jigsaw Health. They asked me my opinion on The Biggest Loser, obviously,
Oh,
because I had lost a lot of weight. They wanted to know what I thought about this, and I expressed my feelings. But I've heard you talk about this. I know you have your own opinion. And I wouldn't bring it up if I didn't think it was relevant. I think people need to hear these different aspects because I personally think what they did to these people was sinful. But what do you think?
yeah. Well, there are very long-term patterns associated with weight loss that are completely absent in the discussion to the harm of almost everybody engaging in weight loss. So, the way to understand anything is to look at a bell curve and just put, let's put a million people on that bell curve and see what happens. Okay. So with anything, you're always going to find outliers. And if you have a very large population, it could seem like you have a lot of outliers. You have a lot of them. That must explain the story, but it doesn't. Like when you look at the middle of the bell curve, that's the story. And for the majority of people, who undergo weight loss, there's a couple of phenomena that are very real. Anybody will figure out if you give it 30 years. One is what I call first timer syndrome. And it's just that fat loss is going to work incredibly well on people new to fat loss.
Which
It
was
doesn't,
me.
yeah,
Yeah.
doesn't work so well later on with people with repeated cycles. It's much harder. But that first go, it's easy to get incredible results. And so part one with the biggest loser, the problem is they're taking a lot of first timers, people new to fat loss. And so their bodies respond incredibly well. The second part of that is there's a rebound effect, which is hard biology, is not platitudes. It's a hard biology there. And the discussion of what that hard biology consists of is completely missing in the weight loss picture.
Mhm.
Like there's umpteen weight loss coaches and they don't even know the hard biology of the weight regain.
Mhm.
So it's survival has hardwired the human body to efficiently regain weight. So in your case, I would say that you're an outlier. But what you see with most people statistically is they regain most of the weight. And now what we're seeing with the GLP-1 drugs is they regain the weight even faster.
Mhm.
And when you stretch the window out long enough, what you're going to see is not only do they regain all the weight, they regain more. And then they get into chronic weight cycling, which then, going back to the beginning of this program, begins to deposit those inflammatory collagens in the
Mhm.
extracellular matrix. So this is just a thing that needs to enter the discussion of the picture of fat loss, which is number one, what are the very long-term patterns that nobody talks about? And then number two, what is the biology of the weight rebound effect? Those two things need to happen, which is missing from the whole picture of The Biggest Loser. And so what you saw happen, I just saw a recent example of the winner who's regained all the weight and more. And it's
Mm. I saw
and
that. It was on Netflix, I think.
yeah, and the thing that I would add to that is now because that discussion's missing of the biology, the weight rebound effect and first timer syndrome is so much harder for that guy to achieve the same result. It's going to be very, very difficult, if not impossible, because it gets harder and harder and harder. So it's a big
Hmm.
discussion. Yeah.
Well, that's it. Just, I was a first timer. So what I would say is you lose the weight as a first timer, but then your priority absolutely must shift to keeping the weight off then. You do not want to get lackadaisy or let go of that rein too much because there's a higher price to pay than there was originally. I have when we did our first podcast, I had just started a younger girl as a client, so she's like mid-20s, so her first real time at losing weight. And I was like, you hear what Joel's saying? You better not feck this up. We're gonna lose the weight and we're gonna keep it off because it's a higher price to pay than what you paid in the first place. So I implore people, if you can lose the weight, you have to shift your goal, your focus to keeping it off then. It's so important.
Yeah, this is just my opinion. Other people might disagree with this, but just based on, the time I've spent looking at this area, it brings up some imperatives. Top of the list would be if you can get the weight off just using diet, it's much preferable, and then start the exercise in the maintenance period
Mhm.
because one of the biological processes that you're up against is basically the energy gap where metabolism's lower, drive to eat's higher, and you need to counter that. So one of the simplest, best, most effective ways to do that is exercise, and just adding the exercise in when you're starting the maintenance period. So then you've got a counterweight to the seesaw.
That's what I told you. I have James Hill on the podcast tomorrow, and that's pretty much what they say is you don't need to exercise to lose weight, but once you hit the maintenance, that's where you absolutely need to bring exercise in to keep it off. Joel, another good conversation.
Yeah,
It
always a
was good.
blast.
Yeah,
I pick up so many Irishisms from you when we talk. I've got three now. I've got other is otter. So I'm gonna be like, yeah, no, not that one, the otter one.
yeah. And waffle, yeah, that I have a lot of them that come out just randomly, but I think it's like my je ne sais quoi. It's what makes me appealing to people. The accent, but also I'm one of these people where I don't censor myself, so you just never know what's gonna come out. My
Very nice.
kids are like, I'm not going out with you today because we don't know what's gonna happen. There was just to wrap this up to give people a laugh. I get really frustrated with teenagers nowadays. And over the summer, I was pulling out of a local gym here. I have a Jeep. I had the roof off, great workout, feeling great. It was like 30 degrees. And I'm driving around the corner and Connor. And there was these teenagers on the corner. I'm not joking. Like it was like 32 Celsius. It was very hot. And they're in these big winter coats with fur around the hood, and they must have been sweating. And I just I just screamed at them like out of nowhere. Like I didn't just scream. I basically shouted at them that they looked like idiots. And it came out before I even knew I had said it. And I'm like, is this something that happens with age? It just comes out. So I like apologize to God. I'm sorry, I'm not supposed to be mean. But at the same time, I'm like, you must be laughing too, because that was funny. Cause like anyway, but yeah, you just never know what you're gonna get. Well,
I-
thanks for the conversation, Joel. This was great. We'll do it again in a couple of months when I have more stuff I want to be pick your brain on.
yeah, good hang.
Okay, thanks, Joel.
Thank you.